তব ইচ্ছা যদি তাদের উদ্ধার, তবে ইচ্ছা বুঝিবে নিশ্চয়, তবে কথা সে তোমার, বুঝিবে নিশ্চয় তবে ভগবতের কথা সে তব অবতার, ভগবতের কথা সে দৃঢ় হয়া শুনে যদি কানে বারবার, शून्यता सकता कृष्ण और रह गया ना रजसता रजसतम ओते तबे पाइबे निस्तर रजसतम हृदय भद्र शांत गुचिवेता हर हृदय কি করে বুঝাব কথা ভরসে চাই কি করে আর ক্ষুদ্র আমি দিন হেন কোন শক্তি নাহি অথচ আনেছ প্রভু কথা বলিবারে অথচ যে তোমার ইচ্ছা প্রভু করো এইবারে রকিল জগত গুরু বচন সে আমার রকিল আলাই কথা করিবার কামত তোমার তব কৃপা হলে মোর কথা শুদ্ধ হবে কৃপা শুনিয়া সবার সুখ দুঃখ যে গুচাবে আনিয়াছ যদি প্রভু আমারে নাচাতে আনিয়াছ আর নাচাও নাচাও প্রভু নাচাও সে মতে আর কষ্টের পুতুলি যদা নাচে সেই মতে কষ্টের পুতুলি যদা ভকতি নাই বেদ নাই মামু খুব বড় ভকতি আর আর ভক্তি বেদান্ত নাম এবে সার্থক কর আর ভক্তি নাই বেদ নাই নাম খুব বড় ভক্তি নাই বেদ আর ভক্তি বেদান্ত নাম এবে সার্থক কর Then Hare Krishna Deva.
Within this bhajan, Prabhupada also gave 4 Srimad Bhagavatam slokas that for some reason were not included in this. What were those slokas? The 2? Yeah. You want to? It's okay, fine. Okay. 1, 2, 19 through 20. 17 through 21. If anyone wants to look that up. So these were Srila Prabhupada's realizations upon arriving at America in the city of Boston. Today we'll continue the reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. By His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. He was now in America. He was in a major American city, rich with billions, populated with millions, and determined to stay the way it was. Prabhupada saw Boston from the viewpoint of a pure devotee of Krishna. He saw the hellish city life, people dedicated to the illusion of material happiness. All his dedication and training moved him to give these people the transcendental knowledge and saving grace of Krishna consciousness. Yet he was feeling weak, lowly, and unable to help them on his own. He was but, as he had written here, an insignificant beggar with no money. He had barely survived the 2 heart attacks at sea. He spoke a different language. He dressed strangely. Yet he had come to tell people to give up meat-eating, illicit sex, intoxication, and gambling, and to teach them to worship Lord Krishna, who to them was a mythical Hindu god. What would he be able to accomplish? So Srila Prabhupada, finally, after practically an entire lifetime of setting his goal on fulfilling the mission that his spiritual master had given him, now, for instance, one gentleman asked Prabhupada, "Why did you choose America to go to?" Prabhupada said, "Yes, usually people, they aim for London. But I had no money." Prabhupada couldn't buy a ticket for anywhere. And I was offered a free ticket to America. And I decided that America would be the best place. So I took that ticket, first class accommodation on a steamship liner. And now Prabhupada was arriving not in New York directly, because the boat, the Jaladuta, first came to Boston. And in Boston, Prabhupada saw the first city of America. Now, Boston itself is a very historic city in America. And it's all based on religious freedom, which is quite amazing. The whole country of America is based on religious freedom. Because in England is the Commonwealth. England had so many different colonies that it had overtaken, such as India and also America. And they began their own church because they wanted to break away from the Roman Catholic Church. They began the Anglican Church in the 1600s. But there were people, there were Christians who wanted to worship God without the strict rules and regulations of a established religion. And they were called Puritans, they were called separatists. They wanted their own freedom to worship God according to their beliefs in God from the Bible, Christianity. So they took the adventure and the risk of leaving Europe and going all the way to the New World of America to begin their own colonies. And Boston was that major port where the people came. Then finally, just as in the case of the Indian history, when the Indians realized that they were being so subjugated by England, they wanted their independence, they wanted their country back, and they wanted no more restrictions from the East Indian Company that was sucking everything out of the country. America went through the exact same thing, but 200 years earlier. And there at Boston, they began the revolution against the English. And what was that revolution? You'd be surprised to know. Here in India, the English were taking all the tea from India and making everyone intoxicated. They were completely addicted to tea drinking, all of their colonies. So just as here in India, there's so many parallels. The British put taxes on cotton, on salt, on tea. It was impossible to get grains. Everything was controlled because they were taking everything out, sending it to England. So similarly, in America, one of their biggest colonies, they had a heavy tax on tea, and everyone had become addicted to tea already. So you could only get tea from the East Indian Company, only when it came from England. Everything was so restricted. So 4 ships of tea came from England, and the revolutionaries, in the middle of the night, they dressed up as Indians, and they took all the tea, thousands of tons of tea, and threw it into the ocean. No more tea drinking. And that all happened in Boston. And that was the beginning of the revolution by which America became free from England and free from the East India Company, just as India did later in the 1900s. This was the 1700s. So now America had 200 years of independence. 1776, now it was 1965, practically 200 years. So Boston itself, Prabhupada saw the glitter, beautiful city, so many canals, bridges, underpasses, freeways. He saw all that within a few hours. But he also saw the suffering of the people, how they were completely ignorant of the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. So Satsvarup Maharaj, in one of his poems, he said, yes, Boston was great, but Srimad Bhagavatam is the greatest. So Prabhupada wanted to give this message. He later quoted from, we'll read that sloka, how he saw how the people were simply in the daytime engaged in working hard, trying to get money, maintain their families, and at night in sleeping and indulging in sense gratification. So Prabhupada, he was completely alone. He was the first Vaishnava sannyasi who had ever stepped foot in America. He had the whole country to conquer, and he was feeling very insignificant at this time. And in his heartfelt feelings, this poem came out of his heart. So now we'll read on. Helplessly, he spoke his heart directly to God. I wish that you may deliver them. I am seeking your benediction so that I can convince them. And for convincing them, he would trust in the power of God's holy name and in the Srimad Bhagavatam. This transcendental sound would clean away desire for material enjoyment from their hearts and awaken loving service to Krishna. On the streets of Boston, Prabhupada was aware of the power of ignorance and passion that dominated the city, but he had faith in the transcendental process. He was tiny, but God was infinite, and God was Krishna, his dear friend. So in this paragraph, Satsvarup Maharaj, he refers again and again to Krishna as God. And Prabhupada, he explains that God is the same for everyone. When he began his preaching, when he finally reached Butler, Pennsylvania, and he saw in this little small town in the middle of nowhere, no one heard of Butler, Pennsylvania in America, so many churches. The people were pious. They believed in God, but they hadn't yet heard about Krishna. And this was the special message that Prabhupada was bringing, because they had everything they needed materially. Prosperous. Prabhupada wrote, we get Prabhupada's feelings because now our godbrother Bhumipati Das, he lives here, he's translating Prabhupada's letters that Prabhupada wrote at this time. When he reached America, he was writing to Sumati Morarji, he was writing to his eldest son, who he called Buro, that's Prayagraj, he used to be Prabhupada's constant companion when Prabhupada would go to see Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He got so many blessings from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. When they went together to Radhakund to meet Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and the little boy offered his obeisances, only 4 or 6 years old, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said, "Oh, you're a cowherd boy, where are your cows?" So Prabhupada, he traveled this spiritual journey with his son like this, and he was encouraging him, now I need help. I need help with the printing. I want you to help me. I'm alone here. And then he would write to the Gaudiya Mat in Mathura. He would write to Narayan Maharaj telling him about all the sights that he sees in America, how so far he's seen absolutely no poverty. Everyone has beautiful houses. The roads are like velvet. Everything is wonderful. They just need Krishna. So many zeros, you add the one, Krishna. On the 19th of September, now we have a few pictures here. This is the harbor in Boston, and you can see here there's so many canals, and when the ship comes in, the main part of the city is right there, so Prabhupada was able to visit parts of the city during the few hours that Captain Pandya took him there.
It's called a Mystic River.
Mystic River? Is that what it's called? Yeah. Here's Prabhupada looking at the port there, the Commonwealth Pier. Now, aside from Prabhupada's first alighting in America, in Boston, later, and we'll read this as we go through the volumes, it may take us another lifetime to get through the whole Lilamrita at the rate we're going. Prabhupada did many firsts in Boston. When he first established the New York Temple, and then the San Francisco Temple, and then he went to Montreal, he sent Satsvarup Maharaj, he was a grihasta at the time, the husband of Jadharani, the painter. He sent Satsvarup to set up the first printing press of ISKCON in Boston. He set up the art department there, and from there the books were being printed. So that was another first in Boston. Another first was he established the first deities of Radha and Krishna, Radha Ballabh, in Boston. Beautiful, there are 3 sets of deities, all the same size. Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C., Prabhupada established. But the first was in Boston. And the other first thing that he did in Boston was he initiated Western devotees with the Brahmin Diksha for the first time, both men and women. So Boston was a very great landmark, not only historically, not only the fact that Prabhupada reached America, but within ISKCON itself, many firsts. So Prabhupada, he made Boston very special for his preaching activities there. think there's another picture here. Yes. Now, because at this Commonwealth Pier is where Prabhupada first arrived, every year, even to this day, the devotees from the Boston Temple, they come from different parts of America. They have a nice festival there with Harinam Kirtan, Sankirtan, and Prasad distribution. So this is one of those festivals where they're having memories of Srila Prabhupada. Yes, so here's Prabhupada. He's seeing America. He sees the big sign A&P. A&P, who knows what A&P stands for?
Atlantic Pacific.
Yes, Atlantic and Pacific.
Grocery and
Right.
empire.
They're the big grocery chain of in America, reaching from Atlantic to the Pacific. Prabhupada noticed that sign when he first landed, and then Prabhupada was inspired to write the poem. Now Prabhupada is coming off, and we'll go on. On the 19th of September, the Jaladuta sailed into New York Harbor and docked at a Brooklyn pier at 17th Street. Srila Prabhupada saw the awesome Manhattan skyline, the Empire State Building, and like millions of visitors and immigrants in the past, the Statue of Liberty. Srila Prabhupada was dressed appropriately for a resident of Vrindavan. He wore kantimala and a simple cotton dhoti, and he carried japamala and an old chadar. His complexion was golden, his head shaven, sika in the back, his forehead decorated with whitish Vaishnav tilak. He wore pointed white rubber slippers, not uncommon for sadhus in India. But who in New York had ever seen or dreamed of anyone appearing like this Vaishnava? He was possibly the first Vaishnava sannyasi to arrive in New York with uncompromised appearance. Of course, New Yorkers have an expertise in not giving much attention to any kind of strange new arrival. So many strange people in New York City.
Melting pot.
Yes, the melting pot. But people would stop, and they would walk up to Prabhupada. They would say, "Oh, are you from India?" And Prabhupada would very cordially start conversation with them. So now Prabhupada is alighting here in New York. And what happens is, Prabhupada comes out of the port. There's the pier. He comes off of the Jaladuta, and he's standing there. And he doesn't know whether to turn left or to turn right. So he made a phone call in Boston to Gopal P. Agarwal, who lived 500 miles away, a 9-hour trip. And in New York City, there's a society called Travelers Aid. Now, this building here, this is called the Port Authority Terminal. It's right in the center of Manhattan, around 32nd Street, 38th Street, I forget where exactly. And from here, hundreds and thousands of buses come into New York and go out of New York. You'll see this long building and this road here. That road goes into a tunnel under the Hudson River over to New Jersey, and in that way the whole country is then open for the buses to travel from New York City through this Port Authority bus terminal. So the Travelers Aid, they have their office in the Port Authority bus terminal. And Gopal Agarwal contacted them. They sent an agent to meet Prabhupada right at the pier, and they took him first to the Scindia Navigation Office for him to book his return ticket. Because Prabhupada had no money, he only had sponsorship for 1 month by Mr. Agarwal. And he was just realistically thinking, How am I going to exist in this country with no money? He had 200 sets of books. He had sold one set of the 3 volumes to Captain Pandya. So he had $20 and 40 rupees. 40 rupees is enough to spend in about half an hour in America. Then you're finished. So Prabhupada, he booked his ticket for 2 months. He said, all right, I have sponsorship for 1 month. Maybe I can survive for another month. He told the Scindia steamship that you book my ticket for 2 months. So then the agent from Traveler's Aid took Prabhupada to the Port Authority bus terminal. They reached late to New York Harbor because of fog in the night. So they got to the pier at about 12:30, and his bus was going to be at 5 o'clock. So he got to see more of Port Authority bus terminal. It means he spent a few hours there. Now, as a result of Prabhupada putting his lotus feet at Port Authority bus terminal, many years later, we can say 10 years later, hundreds and hundreds of devotees were created from the Port Authority bus terminal. We got a permit to set up a booth there. And the Port Authority bus terminal became like a second temple in New York. Every day, devotees were being made, brought back to the temple, and then being sent out as initiated disciples all over the world. So this is all the grace of Srila Prabhupada. He spent a few hours there. And as a result of that, so much book distribution, so many devotees were made there at Port Authority.
Still going on. Perhaps still going on.
I don't know. Srila Prabhupada was on his own. He had a sponsor, Mr. Agarwal, somewhere in Pennsylvania. Surely someone would be here to greet him. Although he had little idea of what to do as he walked off the ship onto the pier, this is a quote from Prabhupada, I did not know whether to turn left or right. He passed through the dockside formalities and was met by a representative from Traveler's Aid sent by the Agarwals in Pennsylvania, who offered to take him to the Scindia ticket office in Manhattan to book his return passage to India. At the Scindia office, Prabhupada spoke with the ticket agent, Joseph Forrester, who was impressed by this unusual passenger's Vaishnava appearance. His light luggage, he just had one little suitcase, and his apparent poverty. He regarded Prabhupada as a priest. Most of Scindia's passengers were businessmen or families, so Mr. Forrester had never seen a passenger wearing the traditional Vaishnav dress of India. He found Srila Prabhupada to be a pleasant gentleman who spoke of the nice accommodations and treatment he had received aboard the Jaladuta. Prabhupada asked Mr. Forrester to hold a space for him on a return ship to India. His plans were to leave in about 2 months, and he told Mr. Forrester that he would keep in touch. Carrying only 40 rupees cash, which he himself called a few hours spending in New York, and an additional $20 he had collected from selling 3 volumes of the Bhagavatam to Captain Pandya, Srila Prabhupada, with umbrella and suitcase in hand, and still escorted by the Traveler's Aid representative, set out for the Port Authority bus terminal to arrange for his trip to Butler. So we've now completed chapter 1. Prabhupada is firmly fixed in his destination, New York City. And we're going on to chapter 2, which is entitled Butler, Pennsylvania, the first testing ground. Here we have, America's a very big country, like 3,000 miles across. And there are highways, just like we have our Grand Trunk Road that goes from Amritsar to Calcutta. So there are highways that go from New York, the Atlantic, all the way across to the Pacific. and one of them is National Highway 80. So from New York, this is the National Highway 80. Straight across, here's Butler. 9 hours it took. Let's see what else. This is when they reach, okay? Now, this is a quotation from a letter that Sumati Morarji wrote to Prabhupada. Sumati Morarji was encouraging Prabhupada in his mission at every step. So this is something that Prabhupada wrote to Sumati Morarji. By the grace of Lord Krishna, the Americans are prosperous in every respect. They are not poverty-stricken like the Indians. The people in general are satisfied so far as their material needs are concerned, and they are spiritually inclined. When I was in Butler, Pennsylvania, about 500 miles from New York City, I saw there many churches, and they were attending regularly. This shows that they are spiritually inclined. I was also invited by some churches and church-governed schools and colleges, and I spoke there, and they appreciated it and presented me some token rewards. When I was speaking to the students, they were very eager to hear about the principles of Srimad Bhagavatam, but the clergymen were cautious about allowing students to hear me so patiently. They feared that the students might be converted to Hindu ideas, as is quite natural for any religious sect. But they do not know that devotional service of the Lord, Sri Krishna, is the common religion for everyone, including even the Aborigines and cannibals in the jungle. So Prabhupada was seeing the broad scope of Krishna consciousness, and eventually, by Prabhupada's inspiration, through the work of his disciples and followers, Krishna consciousness was able to spread to every corner of the world. Prabhupada's last instruction when Brahmananda came to see Prabhupada when he was sick, Prabhupada said to him, "Go to the interior." He meant the interior of Africa, where so many natives are living. And here also we have our tribal programs. The devotees are preaching in the tribal areas all over India, all over the world. They're preaching like that. It doesn't matter. The most affluent, such as in America and the Western countries, and the most backward, uneducated, everyone can take to Krishna consciousness by chanting Hare Krishna. The bus came swinging out of the terminal into the daylight of Midtown Manhattan, riding along in the shadows of skyscrapers, through asphalt streets crowded with people, trucks, and automobiles, and into the heavy traffic bound towards the Lincoln Tunnel. So this tunnel goes underneath the river that takes one to New Jersey. The bus entered the tunnel and emerged on the Jersey side of the Hudson River, continuing down the New Jersey Turnpike, past fields of huge oil tanks and sprawling refineries. The Manhattan skyline was on the left, while 3 lanes of traffic sped 60 miles an hour in each direction. Newark Airport came up close by on the right, with jets visible on the ground. Electric power lines spanning aloft between steel towers stretched into the horizon. So this is what when you live on the East Coast. New York City it's a huge megapolis. So many different parts of New York City. Is gigantic. Millions and millions, 25 million people in one city. And then you go into the tunnel and you come out New Jersey side. And in New Jersey, it's so industrialized. So many refineries and so many different, you just drive through the turnpike, you come to a huge airport, Newark Airport, and then you start going into the countryside, going towards Pennsylvania, which is forests and mountains. Srila Prabhupada had never before witnessed anything of such magnitude. He was now seeing for himself that American culture was based on passion for more and more sense gratification, and it was a scene of madness. For what important business were people rushing to and fro at breakneck speed? He could see their goals advertised on the billboards. Of course, he had many times traveled the road from Delhi to Vrindavan, but it did not have many advertisements. A traveler would see mostly the land, roadside streams, temples, homes, farmers in their fields. Most people went on foot or traveled by ox cart or bicycle. And in Vrindavan, even the ordinary passers-by greeted each other by calling the names of God, Jai Radhe, Hare Krishna. Now there were factories outside Delhi, but nothing like this. The cumulative effect did not pack nearly the materialistic punch of these fields of oil tanks, mammoth factories, and billboards alongside the crowded superhighway. Meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication, and gambling, the very sins Srila Prabhupada had come to preach against, were proudly glamorized on mile after mile of billboards. The signs promoted liquor and cigarettes. Roadside restaurants offered slaughtered cows in the form of steaks and hamburgers. And no matter what the product, it was usually advertised by a lusty-looking woman. But now you can find all these things in India now too, because they're following the West. You see the furniture advertisements, Jain Furniture, they always have one lusty woman sitting on the chairs. So they're just copying what's going on in America now they brought over to India. And this is why Prabhupada wanted his Western disciples to come here. If they want to copy America, then follow the American Vaishnavas, and that's the success of our temple. They all come to see the foreigners dancing and singing and see how it used to be called the Angrezi temple here. They would come just like you go to visit a zoo to see the animals, so the people will come to see the Westerners singing and dancing. And they still do that. They'll just stand and look at you. But Prabhupada had come to teach the opposite, that happiness is not found in the passion for sense gratification, and that only when one becomes detached from the mode of passion, which leads to sinful acts, can one become eligible for the eternal happiness of Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada, this is all within 2 days. He's having his first impact of America. And the citadel of sin and of Kali Yuga, that's New York City. So he's getting that first. Now he'll be traveling out of the city into the countryside of America, which is more attuned towards the modes of goodness, where there's farming, the small houses, not the big cities with the industrialization. And Prabhupada saw that the people in these small cities, such as Butler, were actually quite pious. They were religiously attending the churches, and there were so many churches just in that one little town of Butler. Prabhupada felt compassion. The compassion of a Krishna-conscious saint had been explained in an age long ago by Prahlad Maharaj. This is a quote. I see that there are many saintly persons indeed, but they are interested only in their own deliverance. Not caring for the big cities and towns, they go to the Himalayas or the forests to meditate with vows of silence. They are not interested in delivering others. As for me, however, I do not wish to be liberated alone, leaving aside all these poor fools and rascals. I know that without Krishna consciousness, without taking shelter of your lotus feet, one cannot be happy. Therefore, I wish to bring them back to the shelter at your lotus feet. So this is the prayer of Prahlad Maharaj to Nrsingadev. Nrsingadev says, I'll give you any benediction. So this was the benediction that Prahlad Maharaj is asking. I want to bring all of these fools and rascals back to the shelter of your lotus feet. And here was Srila Prabhupada, directly in the mood of Prahlad Maharaj, seeing that these people, although they were fabulously prosperous in this country, but completely ignorant of Krishna consciousness and the joy of loving Krishna. The scenery gradually changed into the Pennsylvania countryside, and the bus sped through long tunnels in the mountains. See, in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. Sylvania means forest. And the founder of that whole state, his name was William Penn. So it's the forest of William Penn. It's just all beautiful mountains and forests and greenery. And so this is what Prabhupada was seeing. He was seeing the beauty of the country now rather than the passion and the ignorance of the city. Night came, and it was late, after 11, when the bus entered the heavily industrialized Pittsburgh area on the shore of the Allegheny River. So on the other side of Pennsylvania is the city of Pittsburgh. It's Steel City. It's where they have all of the steel mills. Our closest, we have a temple in Pittsburgh, but it's like an outpost to New Vrindavan. New Vrindavan is just an hour or so away from Pittsburgh. And New Vrindavan is in the hills of West Virginia, completely isolated from modern civilization practically, where Prabhupada wanted a replica with 7 temples of Vrindavan here. So he called the place New Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada couldn't see the steel mills clearly. This is in Pittsburgh. But he could see their lights and their industrial fires and smoking stacks. Millions of lights shone throughout the city's prevailing dinginess. When the bus finally pulled into the terminal, it was past midnight. Gopal Agarwal, Prabhupada wrote later in his diary and to his in his letters that it was between 2 and 3 in the morning when Prabhupada reached. And he also explained that, remember, Prabhupada was on the ship and then got into New York. He had nothing to eat. All he had with him was a little bit of chira. So he just had some chira and peanuts the whole 9-hour trip. Gopal Agarwal was waiting with the family Volkswagen bus to drive Prabhupada to Butler, about 1 hour north. He greeted Prabhupada with folded palms and, "Welcome, Swamiji," bowing from the waist several times. This was not any of Gopal's doing. His father, a Mathura businessman with a fondness for sadhus and religious causes, had requested him to host the Swamiji. This wasn't the first time his father had arranged for a sadhu acquaintance to come to America. Several times, he had sent sponsorship papers for Gopal to sign, and Gopal had obediently done so, but nothing had ever come of them. So when the sponsorship letter for A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami had come, Gopal had promptly signed and returned it, thinking that this would be the last they would hear of it. But then, just a week ago, a letter had come. Sally Agarwal had opened it and then, in alarm, called to her husband, "Honey, sit down. Listen to this. The Swami is coming." Srila Prabhupada had enclosed his picture so that they would not mistake him. The Agarwals had looked curiously at the photograph. "There'll be no mistake there," Gopal had said. So what actually happened, Prabhupada explained to the devotees later, that as soon as Prabhupada took sannyas from Keshav Maharaj, as is with whenever you take sannyas, and Prabhupada would do the same thing, he would immediately send the sannyasis out for preaching. Preaching. You send them out immediately. So Prabhupada, after he took sannyas, he started to travel and preach. And he would go to Agra, and he would stay in different businessmen's homes. And he stayed for a few nights in the home of Mr. Agarwal, the father of Gopal. And Mr. Agarwal, he was pouring out his heart to Prabhupada, that my eldest son, he went to America to study electrical engineering, and one English woman captured him and married him, and he hasn't ever come back since then. So when, of course, this is the way Mr. Agarwal was explaining it, but Prabhupada was hearing it in a different way, that, oh, your son is in America? Why not ask him to sponsor me? So this is how Mr. Agarwal understood it. But actually what happens when the Indians, because it was so difficult in the 60s for Indians to get to America. We read in the first volume, all the different difficulties Prabhupada had with his P-form and all the different things, just getting the ticket, everything. So when the Indians finally get to America, they don't want to go back. Even Prabhupada didn't want to come back. He didn't want to come back because he was getting no support or encouragement in India, and he wanted to fulfill his spiritual master's order. But most Indians, when they go to America, they want to settle there because it's poverty-stricken in India at that time, in the 60s. And the easiest way to settle is to get married. It's simple. A few years ago, I was giving this class on the day that Prabhupada arrived, and I explained that even when I went to the university, I was just there for 2 days. I was walking down the road on the campus, and I saw one senior Indian. I had never seen an Indian before in my life. He was walking the opposite direction, and he meets me and he greets me, and within 5 minutes, he asked me to marry him. And I said, well, I don't even know your name. He said, yes, but I want to settle here, and it'd be very good, you'd be doing... So this is the mentality when the Indians who were desperate to get out of India finally reach America. They want to settle in America. So the father was thinking that the woman had captured him and kept him in America, but normally the Indians want to stay in America. Okay. The unsuspecting Agarwals were simple American people, according to Sally Agarwal, who had met her Indian husband while he was working as an engineer in Pennsylvania. What would they do with an Indian Swami in their house? Prabhupada was a shock for them, but there was no question of not accepting him. They were bound by the request of Gopal's father. Dutifully, Gopal had purchased Srila Prabhupada's ticket from New York to Pittsburgh and had arranged for the agent from Traveler's Aid to meet him. And dutifully, he had driven tonight to meet him. So it was with a mixture of embarrassment, disbelief, and wonder that Gopal Agarwal helped his guest into the Volkswagen and drove back home to Butler. So here we have our saintly assistant to Srila Prabhupada. This is Mrs. Sally Agarwal. She saw Prabhupada as if he were her father-in-law. And she was so affectionate to Srila Prabhupada. She doted over him just like a mother. And when she understood what Prabhupada's purpose was in coming to America, she did everything possible to help him. She made programs for him almost every night, in colleges, in churches, in schools, in Lions clubs and Rotary clubs. And when people were interested, she would open up her home in the evenings, and they would have house programs for the people to come and hear Bhagavad-Gita class from Srila Prabhupada. So you'll see here, Prabhupada sitting on a sofa. When Prabhupada first arrived, they couldn't figure out where Prabhupada was going to stay. So the first night, of course they arrived like at 4 in the morning, Prabhupada took rest on the sofa. And they had 2 children. This is the little boy, Bridge. He had just started to walk, and Prabhupada was playing with him. Being a father himself, he was very affectionate to children. And here's Srila Prabhupada with his 3-tiered cooker in their kitchen. And they were meat eaters at the time. Prabhupada wrote in one of his letters that he was so tolerant. They had a cat. So he said, I have to keep my vegetables right next to the place where they keep meat for the cat in the refrigerator. And he would see that Sally Agarwal was feeding the baby, 1.5-year-old baby, 2-year-old baby, powdered meat powder that she would mix with hot water. And this was the standard for how they raised children amongst meat-eater families. And Prabhupada was just so tolerant because he had a mission and he had to carry out that mission. And Sally Agarwal, in her own way, was helping Prabhupada immensely. She would make newspaper reporters come, interview Prabhupada. He was on the front page of the Butler Eagle newspaper. And like that, every way possible, she was trying to help him. So they decided that Prabhupada had to have a place to stay of his own. This is where their house was. This is the main street. And this is where the YMCA is. There's a YMCA also on Mathura Road at Delhi. You can see it. Young Men's Christian Association. It's the counterpart to a Christian Dharmshala where young men could stay. There's also YWCA, that's where young women can stay, but of course they had Prabhupada stay at the YMCA. It was just a few blocks from their house. This was their house. They just had an apartment in the house. They didn't have the whole house. I had a picture of... This is Butler itself. Now, when Prabhupada saw how the Americans lived in these small towns like Butler, you see how everyone has a beautiful home, and in each home, Prabhupada, he explains that previously the demons lived on different planets, then they lived in different countries, then they lived in different families, and now in Kali Yuga, in each home, there's a Hiranyakashipu. And the Hiranyakashipu, these are my subjects, this is my kingdom, because the houses are very nice and they live like that. And when he saw the lifestyle in America, he remembered the Srimad Bhagavatam 2.1.3. The lifetime of such envious householder is passed at night, either in sleeping or in sex indulgence, and in the daytime either in making money or maintaining family members. Because the whole society of America, there's no question of brahmachari life, it's out of the question. There's grihastha life, and that grihastha life goes on till the last breath. So, and that's how the people live, very peacefully in their homes until Krishna in the form of death comes to take them away. September 20th, Butler, Pennsylvania, home of the Jeep. Jeep is where they, we have Jeeps here also. It's the open gypsies.
It was created for the Second World War Army.
Yeah, right. Read a granite plaque in the city park. Butler, famous as the town where the U.S. Army Jeep was invented in 1940, was an industrial city of 20,000, settled amid the hills of an area rich in oil, coal, gas, and limestone. Its industry consisted mainly of factories for plate glass, railroad cars, refrigerators, oil equipment, and rubber goods. 90% of the local laborers were Native Americans. The nominal religion had always been Christian, mostly Protestant with some Catholic, and in later years a few synagogues had appeared, but there was no Hindu community at that time. Gopal Agarwal was the first Indian to move to Butler. As the Volkswagen bus pulled into town, the pre-dawn air was warm and humid. The morning edition of the Butler Eagle would soon be going to the newsstands. Red Chinese fire on India. This is at the time when the Sino-Indian War was going on here in India. Prime Minister Shastri declares Chinese communists out to dominate the world. United Nations Council demands Pakistan and India cease fire in 48 hours. So there was a lot of turmoil going on in the 60s here in India. It was also the time when Indira Gandhi approved for the first time cow slaughter. So there were huge riots going on, and sadhus were being killed by the government agencies because of the riots that were happening. A lot of turmoil in India at the time. Srila Prabhupada arrived at the Agarwal's home, Sterling Apartments, at 4 a.m., and Gopal invited him to sleep on the couch. Their place, a townhouse apartment, consisted of a small living room, a dining room, a kitchenette, 2 upstairs bedrooms, and a bath. Here they lived with their 2 young children. The Agarwals had lived in Butler for a few years now and felt themselves established in a good social circle. Since their apartment had so little space, they decided that it would be better if the Swami took a room at the YMCA and came to visit them during the day. Of course, living space wasn't the real difficulty. It was him. How would he fit into the Butler atmosphere? He was their guest, so they would have to explain him to their friends and neighbors. Example being that Prabhupada, he followed the same lifestyle that he had followed here in India, and he would come every day and cook, and he would also wash his clothes in the bathroom, in the sink, and then he would take his dhoti and stretch it out on the lawn in front of their house, which nobody does that in America, sorry. So his habits were quite extraordinary for Americans. And the Agarwals, they felt that they were going to have to explain to their neighbors and their friends their new guest in the house. Prabhupada stayed 21 days, 3 weeks with them. Srila Prabhupada was immediately a curiosity for whoever saw him. In anxiety, Mrs. Agarwal decided that instead of having people speculate about the strange man in orange robes living in her house, it would be better to let them know about him from the newspapers. She explained her plan to Prabhupada, who laughed, understanding that he didn't fit in. Sally hurried Prabhupada off to a Pittsburgh newspaper office, but the interviewer wasn't able to comprehend why this person should make an interesting story. Sally then took him to the local Butler Eagle, that's the name of the newspaper, where his presence was accepted as indeed newsworthy. So this is similar to what happened when Prabhupada was about to leave Calcutta. Mr. Bhattacharya, who was the kirtan singer who Prabhupada stayed with when he went back to Calcutta before he left for America, he thought it would be a very interesting story that Prabhupada was going to America to preach Vaishnava philosophy. None of the Calcutta newspapers thought that it was very interesting, except one local newspaper printed Prabhupada's picture in a little article about Prabhupada. So in the big city of Pittsburgh, which was about an hour away, they didn't see any reason for printing a story about Prabhupada. But in Butler, oh, I've gone over time. I'm sorry. In Butler, because the people were seeing Prabhupada regularly, they found it very interesting. So we'll continue next week. Prabhupada has finally made his place in Butler, Pennsylvania. Hare Krishna.